So welcome everybody. My name is Rabbi Mark Fishman, Director of the Shah Learning Center, and it is an absolute delight to welcome all of you from near and far for this first of 4 presentations by Shulie Mishkin. Shulie made Aliyah from New York with a master's degree in Jewish history from Columbia University, and after completing the Ministry of Tourism guiding course in 1997, she began guiding professionally, and since then has taught all ages from toddlers to retirees. Her tours provide a complete picture of the land of Israel, Jewish heritage, and a strong reliance on sources ranging from the Bible to 19th century travelers' reports. It is an absolute pleasure to be able to welcome Shulie Mishkin, who's going to be talking to us today about Akko, and this is the first of 4 presentations. We ask you, if you have any questions, please write them in the chat. Keep your microphones muted for the meanwhile, and you can ask questions in the chat. And Shulie will leave a couple of minutes at the end for in-personal questions as well. Without any further ado, it's my pleasure to hand over to Shulie.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rabbi Fishman. Welcome, everybody. So what we are going to do while I'm talking, I'm just going to share my screen. What we're going to do is we are going to be traveling over the next few weeks to various places in Israel. And we are going to be doing that through the stories and also through many of the pictures. And today we are going to one of the most intriguing cities. It's not one of the most visited cities in Israel. It's not like Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, but it's definitely one of the more intriguing cities, and that's Akko, or as it's often said in English, Akko, but it's the same place. We're going to see on the map where everything is, don't worry. And this is just a great picture of it from, an aerial view where you can get a sense of the bay, which is going to be very important to us, to Akko's history, because it's a nice protected bay. So Akko is an interesting place to talk about. It's unusual in a lot of ways. It's on the border, as we're going to see. It's on the far northern coast of the land of Israel. And throughout at least Jewish history, it's been a question of, is it part of the land of Israel? Is it not part of the land of Israel? Besides it being on the border, right, all the way up north, close to Lebanon, there's always been, because of this natural bay and harbor, it's protected. So ever since there's been a harbor there, which is more than 2,000 years, there's been a constant contact with people arriving from outside of Eretz Israel, from outside of the land of Israel. So you have lots of different visitors, right? Many non-Jewish conquerors, as we're going to see, but also a lot of Jews, right? In the era before Zionism and before people would come and emigrate to the land of Israel, people who were moving here were coming in often through Akko. So we're going to be taking a look at that. It's also a place that has had a lot of, I'll add in parentheses, frustrated, but a lot of messianic hopes. Okay, we've had battles between the Crusaders and the Muslims. Napoleon tries to conquer here in Ottoman times, and he's rebuffed. There are these world powers that are fighting with each other here in Akko, leading to the belief, certainly by Jews, that, wow, maybe this is the end of time. Maybe this is the battles of Armageddon, right? To borrow a Christian term. So with all of these things, Akko is a rather intriguing place, and that's what we're going to be exploring for the next hour. Okay, so first of all, let's understand, always important to understand where we are. Okay, so here's Akko right here, up on the coast, right? Close to major roads, certainly in today's language, right? Route number 4, the coastal road going along here, but in ancient times as well, right? Major roads traveling up the coast, Roman times, and even earlier than that. We're going to see that we're very close to the border of today, right? If we keep on going past Nahariya, we'll eventually get to Rosh Hanikra, and that's the end of the line, and then you get to Lebanon. But there's a natural border there as well, right? Borders today are often political, but in ancient times, borders are natural, and we'll see that there's a natural border. The cliffs of Rosh Hanikra, we'll get to that a little bit later. The other thing I want you to notice that's very important, and in order to notice it, I think I'm going to erase what I drew here, right? We saw it in the aerial photo. We have this nice little natural natural protected bay. It's kind of one side of the parentheses, of which we have the other side in Haifa, right? Which is also a nice natural protected bay. And a protected bay is a place that is going to be natural for a port. We don't have a port in Akko today, a modern port. We do have ships coming in, but we don't have a modern port. Today, the modern ports of Israel are in Haifa and in Ashdod. But in ancient times, this is a very significant port, and therefore the city is a very wealthy trading city. Okay, so that's just something to keep in mind as we understand where we are. Okay. Don't be scared by the timeline. Akko has a lot of history. Don't worry, we're going to be going back to these things, but I usually find it helpful to kind of get a big picture, and then we'll focus in more. But as you can see, we go back, the city goes back, the earliest levels of settlement go back 5,000 years, right? 3,000 before the Common Era is the earliest level of settlement. We have a small Canaanite city. The city's location moves. We're going to see that as we go on. The Tel, the ancient city, in the very beginning is not by the water, and then it moves to the water. We have a Canaanite city. You can see I bolded the various rulers of the city. So if you just want to pick that out and that's helpful to you, that's always great to be able to do that. It's a city that's important enough to be conquered by Paro Tutmos, by the Egyptian king in 1500. Then we have the rulers who are the Phoenicians, right? The Phoenicians who are in what we call today Lebanon. We'll come back to them. We're going to talk about them. They are the rulers of the coast. They are the rulers of the sea. So even though the Phoenicians give Akko to the Israelites, the Jewish King Solomon, the Judean King Solomon, really the Phoenicians are the ones who are in charge. By 500 before the Common Era, the city expands to the harbor. Okay, Alexander the Great conquers Akko. It becomes a Hellenistic city, and then the harbor becomes really important. It becomes a Roman base. Now, you may be seeing a theme here. And as we go on, we talk about other cities as well. The cities on the coast up until modern times, the cities on the coast were usually ruled by non-Jews. The Jews tended to settle in the mountains. And this is a little bit flipped today. But in ancient times, the Jews were in the mountains, and on the coast were whatever other nations there were, whether it was the Phoenicians or the Philistines or the Greeks or the Romans or the Crusaders, right? And that's the same theme that you're seeing here. The coast is taken by the non-Jews, some of them coming from the outside, some of them from the land, but that's an important place for them. Okay, so the Romans are here, but despite the fact that this is kind of officially a non-Jewish city, there are significant Jewish communities and Christian communities in Akko throughout, pretty much. Okay, the Muslims conquer the city in the 7th century when they conquer the whole land of Israel. The Crusaders come 1100 and conquer here 1104. When Akko, along with the rest of the land of Israel, falls to the Muslims, to Salah ad-Din, okay, 4 years later, along comes Richard the Lionheart, reconquers Akko, it becomes a Crusader city again, it becomes the capital of his kingdom. Okay, so we've got this kind of jumping back and forth, this ping pong between Muslims, Crusaders. While the Crusaders are in charge, Akko, kind of ironically, as we're going to see, the Crusaders are not exactly great lovers of the Jews, but it becomes a place that is easier to get to than it had been before. And so we have quite a few very significant Jews, rabbis, who show up and who settle in Akko. Okay, only to have that period come to an end by towards the end of the 13th century. The Mamluks, again, Muslims, conquer, destroy Akko, and it remains destroyed for 450 years. Okay, and that's a very significant point about a lot of places on the coast. But the city starts again in the 18th century. The Ottomans rebuild Akko. The Jews come back It's attacked by Napoleon, but Napoleon is defeated. We have the Baha'i who are here, and the prophet of the Baha'i is jailed by the Ottoman rulers of the city. The British come, and we have the story of the Akko prison break. We'll come back to that. And today, of course, Akko is part of the state of Israel. It is still very much a mixed city, right, with Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs living there. Most of the time, relatively peaceful. Some people may remember a few years ago when there were terrible riots in the mixed cities in Israel, and Akko was one of the places where the Arabs really attacked a lot of the Jewish communities there. So that's some of the more recent history. Okay, so that's just to give us a large picture of what's going on here. Now, where was the original city? Okay, so the old city that we talk about today, where we're going to be spending most of our time. Okay, hold on. Okay, here's our old city, right? Basically by the water, by the harbor, but that's not the beginnings of the city. The beginnings of the city, oddly enough, are inland, are over here, what's called Tel Akko. Today, when you drive into Akko, anybody who's a little bit familiar with the roads and with the places in Israel, you drive into Akko from route number 4, right? And this is taking you through the heart of the modern city. And on the way, you pass the Tel, right? You pass the beginnings of Akko, but that's really only the very beginnings. Already by Hellenistic times, the city is out here, right? Is out by the harbor. The rabbis, all right, rabbis in the Midrash, in the Talmud, they are very interested in Akko, and they have all kinds of, there are a lot of fascinating legends about Akko. One of them is about its name, right? The name really is probably coming from the Greek word Akka, which means healer, right? The waters are healing. There's a river here called the Naaman River. And there's a Greek legend about Hercules who's bitten by a hydra and cured by the water from the Naaman River. But the rabbis may have liked that explanation, but they want to add their own explanation. They say, what is Akko? Akko is the 2 Hebrew words ad ko, till here, right? What do we mean till here? That when the flood happened in the days of Noah, when you have the flood, the waters rise till they get to Akko. And then God says, ad ko, till here, no more, no more waters, right? So we have all different kinds of legends about Akko. The rabbis are definitely very familiar with it, and we'll come back to who's traveling through here and where are they going, but we'll leave that for a moment. In biblical times, right, in Tanakh times, as we said, the settlement is on the hill, is on the Tel. Today, this is the Tel of the city, right? A Tel is a archaeological layers, an ancient city, layer upon layer upon layer. Here, the Tel is basically not so tough. They've done a little bit of excavating here, but not a ton. But what is very visible at the top of the Tel is this statue of a horse and rider. This is supposed to represent Napoleon coming towards the city. Why we are obsessed with statues of Napoleon, we have them in Jaffa too, is a good question, which we will not be getting into. But the other thing you can notice here is this nice map on the right here of the various tribes. And if you look, we are very clearly in the tribe of Asher. Okay, Asher is not one of the super famous tribes, right? We talk about the prominent tribes we usually talk about. Judah and Ephraim and Benjamin. Asher is kind of one of those guys off to the side. We don't hear about them so much, but Asher is Akko is in the tribe of Asher, and we actually have a nice explanation of the verse, right? When Moses gives all the tribes blessings at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, he says, Asher barzel unechoshet man ulecha. Bronze and copper are your lock. And the Ramban explains, and we'll see that the Ramban actually was in Akko. He says, Asher, why is Moses talk about the locks of Asher? He says Akko and Asher in general is the lock of the land of Israel, right? It protects from the invaders because here you are on the coast. You are the first line of defense, protecting from the invaders. Okay. Besides that, we don't really hear very much about Akko in biblical times. in the old city, there's a place that is considered to be the site of the synagogue of Ahab, the king of Israel. If you know a little bit of biblical stories, you might say, Ahab, what's he doing with a synagogue? He wasn't such a synagogue going type, right? That's an interesting question. But we have all kinds of strange traditions, and this is one of the traditions. Why connect Ahab to here? Ahab is down here, right, in the Shomron, in the area of Menashe. Why are we putting him up here? Because Ahab's wife is Jezebel, and she comes from the land of the Phoenicians, from Tyre and Sidon. So Ahab is very connected to this area. Does he really have a synagogue? I'm not going to determine that, but it's a good story. Okay, so while we're talking a little about the Phoenicians, the neighbors of Asher, the neighbors of Akko, let's understand a little more about the Phoenicians. So the Phoenicians are interesting. They, unlike other empires in ancient times, like the Assyrians or the Babylonians or certainly the Egyptians, they're not conquerors. They're not really warriors. We don't hear, we'll talk a little about the Punic Wars, right, and Carthage. That's also the Phoenicians. But in general, we don't hear about them as great warriors, but they do manage to build an empire through trade. Okay, Phoenicians are great traders, and that's part of our story of Akko, right? So they start up here in what we today call Lebanon, but they build their way, they sail their way, right, down the coast, and they have outposts along the coast of the land of Israel, and then all the way up here to Asia Minor, right? And then they eventually make their way all the way to North Africa, right? And they establish a huge empire, colonies, trading colonies in North Africa. The most famous one, of course, is Carthage. Okay, Carthage, we know about the Punic Wars against the Romans. We don't always connect Punic, Phoenicians, the same thing, right? So the Phoenicians are in Carthage, and they colonize through trade. And their major cities are Tyre and Sidon. We don't hear about Lebanon. We don't even hear really about Phoenician, right? Phoenician is a name that comes later. But we do definitely hear about Tyre and Sidon in the Bible. We have trade ties with them, right? Hiram, King Hiram of Tyre has marriage ties and trade ties with King Solomon. Ahab, like we said, marriage ties and trade ties. From Tyre, we get Phoenician actually comes from the word for purple. And Phoenicians became famous for the Tyrian purple. They made this fabulous purple dye out of murex snails. And dyeing in the old days is definitely an industry for the wealthy, right? Only very, very rich people have colored clothing, right? We could talk about being born to the purple or royal blue. So who's supplying all that fabulous color? A lot of it is coming from Tyre, and that's another way that they're getting their money. Okay, the other things that they're creating that are important for Jews, for their neighbors, the Judeans, they have a mint. Okay? The Tyre has a very reputable mint, and it's from that mint that you can. It's the only mint that the rabbis talk about that you can give your half shekel donation to the temple. Interesting, right? You have to give a yearly donation to the temple, but it can only be given as a half shekel of silver coming from the mint in Tyre, chatzi shekel, machatzit shekel, tsori. So they are the only ones we trust. Everybody else mixes up their silver with other lesser, baser metals, but the Tyrians, we trust them. Okay, so that's just a little bit about the Phoenicians, who are definitely connected to Akko. But let's come back to our city of Akko. I'll just remind people, anybody who came in later, if you have questions, if you have comments, please put them in the chat. I'm sorry that I'm like just kind of going, I have a lot of stuff I want to do with all of you, but I'm very happy to address comments and questions at the end. So by Hellenistic times, meaning the 3rd century before the Common Era, the city has relocated to the sea. Just recently, in the last 10 years, we have discovered the archaeological remains of the Hellenistic harbor. Okay? It's the largest Hellenistic harbor in the land of Israel. The walls that you're seeing here are not from Hellenistic times. They're not even from Crusader times, but we are in the same area of the sea, right? The harbor is right up here. And this is when, right, the city becomes a city that is inhabited also by Jews. And that's where we get to very interesting legal debate, Jewish legal debate. Is Akko part of the land of Israel or not? And you could say, well, why do we care, right? Does it mean, does it have to do with your taxes? Well, not really, because taxes are more local than that, but it has to do with certain Jewish laws. It's important to know, are you in the land of Israel? Are you outside the land of Israel, right? In terms of your fruits and vegetables, right? Do you have to observe the sabbatical year? Do you have to give your truma and maser, your tithes to the priests? It's also connected to divorce, right? If you look at the second source here, okay, even today, right, in Jewish divorce laws, you have to write a get, right? You have to write up your contract that divorces the man, divorces the woman. It has to be written and signed and delivered in her presence. And it's a very, very, I won't say it's an elaborate ritual, but it's a ritual that has very, very strict rules. And the Mishnah that discusses these rules is called the Tractate of Gittin. And it begins by saying, if you bring a get from abroad, let's say a man needs to divorce his wife, he's living in Babylonia, she's in the land of Israel, he can't get there, so he sends a messenger, right? And if he delivers it from abroad, then there are certain more strict rules. He has to write that it was written, it was sealed in his presence. So, okay, fine, very nice. But the very second Mishnah says, all right, so where is that abroad? What are the boundaries of the land of Israel? So take a look at what it says here, right? Rabbi Judah says from Rechem to the east, and Rechem is like the east, from Ashkelon to the south, and Ashkelon is like the south, from Akko to the north, and Akko is like the north, meaning according to Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Judah, Akko is outside of the land of Israel. If you're bringing a get from Akko, you have to do all these very elaborate procedures. Rabbi Meir says, no. Akko is considered to be the land of Israel for a get. So are you in the land? Are you out of the land? The reason we're asking the question is because we're on the border, okay? The picture that you're seeing here might be familiar to people. This is a picture of the really beautiful rock structure by the underground coves and caverns of Rosh HaNikra. If you go a little bit further from Akko, past Nahariya, you get to this area of Rosh HaNikra, which the rabbis knew about also. They called it the ladder of Tzor, the ladder of Tyre, and they would pass it going out of the land, going towards Lebanon, and that was considered to be a border area. It's a natural border. And we have the Talmud in the Jerusalem Talmud, right? Take a look at the first source here. Rabbi Yossi ben Chanina would kiss the rocks of Akko and say, till here is the land of Israel, right? The Talmud is always talking about the value of loving the land of Israel and not wanting to leave the land of Israel. So when he would get to Akko, he would kiss the rocks and say, here we are, right? We finally come in, we've entered the land. Okay, so this is placing us very squarely in this debate of, are we in the land? Are we out of the land? Now let's actually go into the city. So this is a nice little drawing of the different parts of the old city. And we are going to get to something in the new city eventually towards the end, but mostly we're going to talk about the old city, old meaning going back, like we said, the harbor here goes back to Greek times, to Hellenistic times, okay? But the major time periods we're going to talk about are the Crusaders and the Ottomans. And the places we're going to take a look at, right? We're going to take a look at this area over here. This is the Hospitaller fortresses of the Crusaders. It's also the area of the Ottoman prison over here. Okay, we're also going to take a look at the Templar Tunnel, also from the time of the Crusaders. And we're going to be discussing a little bit also about the synagogue of the Ramchal. Who he is, don't worry, we'll get to him. Hey, the only synagogue in the old city. The old city, besides the historical monuments that are there in terms of residents, is almost completely Arab. but you do have this one synagogue deep in the heart of the marketplace of the old city. So you have the historical sites, you have Arab residents, you have a big market. It's all a lot of twisting alleyways. It's nice to see it on Zoom, but it's even nicer to see it in real life. So that's always how I feel like when you come to these Zoom classes. Your next step should be book a ticket to Israel if you can do it. Okay. And the old city is all surrounded, of course, by the water, but surrounded by the walls, right? The walls, which the bottom part of the original part is the Crusader, but much of that was destroyed. And the walls that you see today are mostly the Ottoman walls. Okay, we'll come back to that. Do not worry. Okay, but that's just to give us a little idea of where things are. Oh, and one more place. Just point out, okay, this mosque, the Al Jazar Mosque. Okay, that's also important that we're going to mention. So all of these we're going to be visiting as we travel, as we traverse through the city. Okay, so one of the most unusual and interesting things about Akko is that it's actually two cities. It's two cities, one above the other. Now, in an archaeological site in a tell, to have, the layers is fine, but there's something much more elaborate going on in Akko. We have an entire Crusader city that was built by the Crusaders, okay, in the 12th and the 13th century. The Mamluks come along at the end of the 13th century. They conquer all of the Crusader cities and essentially destroy them. Now, Akko was a very massive city. It couldn't be completely destroyed, okay? But a lot of it was destroyed and then abandoned for 4.5 centuries, okay? When the ruler Dar al-Omar comes, the Bedouin ruler comes and wants to rebuild Akko, right? It's a very important city. There are no bulldozers. He can't get rid of those Crusader structures, the remains of them that are still standing. So what does he do? He fills in what's left there and he builds another city on top. Okay, so there's a 12-meter, a 36 feet difference between the Ottoman city and the Crusader city. Okay, now in the 1950s, Israel starts to excavate what's underneath the Ottoman city, and slowly, it takes a long time. It takes 40, 50 years till it's all completely excavated. Today, you can go see it. It's phenomenal. But they have to uncover the city that's underneath the current city. Okay, so that's just a fascinating thing to be aware of. And today, the two cities exist one on top of the other. You can go see the ruins of the Crusader city, and above it, you have the Ottoman city. And much of the Crusader city, because it was built on such a massive scale, a lot of it is still standing today. So what you're looking at, this fabulous picture on the right, is the halls of the Hospitaller Fortress. Okay, some of it reconstructed, but a lot of it original. In the 1950s, the United Nations, the newly formed United Nations, right? They create something called UNESCO, and you want to have World Heritage Sites. I think it was called something different in the 50s, but it's the same idea. And they offer Israel to have various different heritage sites. And one of the sites that's chosen is Akko, despite the fact that there's nothing to see there yet, right? And the U.S. ambassador comes and they say, oh, we're going to take you on a tour. And you have to picture the ambassador in the 1950s is wearing his three-piece suit, he's wearing his hat. And they take him to crawl through these tunnels because none of this stuff has been exposed. But he's amazed, right? He's amazed and he's astounded. And he says, okay, you have to find out what these things are. But again, was a very long process. The Hospitallers build a huge complex. It's called a castrum, an urban fortress, right? We know about Crusader fortresses that are kind of these freestanding on top of a hill somewhere. Okay, we have them in the Jordan Valley. We have them in the Galilee, right? And they are like all self-contained fortresses that have a dining room and have a church and have a dungeon and have all the things that a fortress needs. This is an urban fortress, right? You can see in the model here on the left, it has all those things that you have on top of the hill, okay? But in this case, it's within the context of a city. Okay. Now the Crusaders, we'll talk about the Crusaders in a second. But the Crusaders who come to the land of Israel and who come to Akko are coming from various different orders. The Hospitallers happen to be an order that feel very connected to John the Baptist. Okay? They call themselves Jean de Acre, and they tend the sick. They take care of the sick, and that's hence their name, right? Hospitallers. Another important order that comes are the Templars, right? Knights Templar, right? A lot of secrecy and mystery surrounding them. They build, this was something that was only discovered in the 90s when there was a plumbing issue, and then archaeologists came in. They built a huge tunnel, right? A 350-meter long tunnel, right? Almost 1,000 feet long tunnel, leading more than 1,000 feet, leading from their fortress out to the sea. Okay, so this was construction on an incredible level. Okay, another thing the Hospitallers build, you might be able to recognize it, always a popular subject, right? They build a whole sewer system, and this is the toilets right over here, that goes all the way out to the sea. Okay, they had dungeons, they had plumbings, they had all different kinds. They had a sugar industry. It was a very, very well-developed city that was divided up into many, many different factions, right? Because Akko is on the coast, the Crusaders needed the help of those Crusaders who were sailors, who had boats, right? Usually the Venetians and the Genoans. Anybody who helps got a piece of the city. So you had different quarters that belonged to the Germans, quarters that belonged to the Venetians, the Hospitallers, the Templars, all different. The Crusaders come to the land of Israel because they want to take Jerusalem, because of the believed Muslim desecration of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. There are a lot of other reasons for the Crusades as well, right? The church wants to increase its power. The church wants to get aimless young men off the streets, right? And send them out to a place where they can do harm, but not to the locals. They promise them that all their debts are going to be absolved. They promise them that all their sins are going to be absolved. So there's a lot of people coming on the Crusades for all sorts of different reasons. Not all the different groups that show up here are friendly to each other. You have two conquests, okay? You have the conquest that's happening at the very beginning, right, of the Crusades, early 1100s, then it's lost to Salah ad-Din, and then you have that second conquest of Richard the Lionhearted. By that point, the Crusaders don't take back Jerusalem. They've lost Jerusalem. Jerusalem was only in the first crusade. They get it back kind of, under different conditions, but they never really fully get it back. So Akko becomes, kind of strangely enough, the capital of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. They don't have Jerusalem, but Akko is the capital of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. And you have this really very interesting city, which once they've, the Crusaders are not exactly friendly to Jews and Muslims. Once they've massacred all the Jews and the Muslims, and then they settle down, it actually becomes a rather oddly multicultural city. First of all, because you have all of these different Christian groups who have to coexist with each other, but also the Crusaders marry locals, marry Arabs, marry Muslims, right? So you have these mixed families. And then they start to allow the Jews to come in. So you have this very cosmopolitan city growing out of a movement that was anything but cosmopolitan. We hear from the bishop of Akko after this crusade of Richard the Lionhearted. The bishop of Akko, Jacques de Vitry, talks about corruption and immorality everywhere. He's very disturbed by all the mixed children, right? The children of the mixed marriages. He says there's adultery, there's murder, there's tons of prostitution. It's not exactly this holy kingdom of Jerusalem that the Crusaders may have envisioned, but it is a city that allows for Jews to come, right? And you have, it now makes it's more accessible to come to the land of Israel. So we hear about all of these important Jews who start making their way to the land of Israel, something they couldn't do at the height of Crusader times, and which wasn't always so easy in Muslim times either, okay? And they start to come. Maimonides, Nachmanides, Rabbi Yechiel of Paris, 300 rabbis who come from Ashkenaz, from Germany and France. Okay? There's this feeling that the redemption is coming. You have these great battles of world powers. Something must be happening. So I just brought you here two quotes, which are great. First of all, Maimonides, right? The Rambam, Rabbi Moses ben Maimon, a Spanish Jew. But his family has to leave Spain. They go to North Africa, and eventually he makes his way to Egypt. But on the way, he goes to the land of Israel, right? And he says 1165. He's a young man. He's only 30 years old. And he writes, on the first day of the week, on the third day of Sivan, I safely left the sea. I came to Akko and was saved from apostasy, right? He had to escape from North Africa, which was taken over by the Muslims who were converting everyone, and arrived in the land of Israel. And I vowed that this day would be one of happiness and joy, feasting and giving gifts to the poor for myself and my household forever. And then he goes on, he says, on the third day, we left Akko to go to Jerusalem. And he goes up to Jerusalem, he goes to the Temple Mount, and then he goes to Hebron, and he goes to the caves of the patriarchs, Marat HaMachpelah, right? All these are important days for him. But Akko is his gateway, is his entrance into the land. Nachmanides, the Ramban, Rabbi Moses ben Nachman, right, who lives after Maimonides, he lives out most of his career in Spain. But he eventually has to leave, forced by the king to leave because he wins in a disputation against Christians. And he comes and he lives out his last days in the land of Israel. First, he comes to Jerusalem, reestablishes the community there. Then he comes to Akko, reestablishes the community there. So he has this firsthand accounts of being here. And we've even found his seal, right, on the road between Akko and Rosh HaNikra, Moses ben Nachman. And here he writes in his commentary to the book of Leviticus, of Vayikra, I will bring the land into desolation, right? The curses that we have about what's going to happen if the people don't listen to God, right? And he says, I will bring the land into desolation. Your enemies that dwell there will be astonished by it. And Nachmanides' commentary says, and these words promise redemption more than any of the visions of Daniel. When it says your enemies will be astonished by it, this is good news, informing us that our land cannot accept our enemies. This is a great proof and promise because you cannot find another land as fertile and as prosperous that is now so destroyed, because since we have left it, it has not accepted any nation or language. All try to settle it and cannot succeed. So this is the Ramban's eyewitness account of coming to the land of Israel, and he's in Akko. But this is a very short-lived kind of flourishing of Jewish life in Akko, because in 1291, the city is conquered by Akko. It's by the Mamluks. It's one of the final conquests of the Mamluks. They conquer Ashkelon and Jaffa and Caesarea, right? The whole coast. And they conquer Akko and they destroy it. They destroy all the coastal cities because the belief is that the Crusaders will want to come back along the coast. And if the cities are destroyed, they won't be able to. This is pictures of coins, 30 gold coins that were found in a shipwreck. It was found 6 years ago, 2017, in Haifa Bay. These are minted after 1252. They are Crusader coins. And we think, because it fits with the dating, this is late, right? Late Crusader coins, that maybe this was a ship of Crusaders who were trying to escape, right? We're trying to get away from the Mamluks, trying to get away from the destruction of the city. And maybe this was coins that belonged to them. The city is completely destroyed, and it stays in its destruction until the 18th century. And then we get a very interesting figure, Dar al-Omar, or here it's written Zahir al-Umar. It's the same thing, right? This is a Bedouin ruler, very powerful Bedouin ruler who basically conquers and rebuilds much of the north and the coast, right? And he comes to the city and he builds arches, superstructures over the remains of the Crusader ruins, okay? And he builds on top. And most of the walls, the sea walls that we see today in Akko, are these Ottoman walls. Okay, Dar al-Omar lived actually a very long life, considering that he was a warrior and had many enemies. Lives from 1689 to 1775. He is a Muslim, but he's tolerant of Christians and Jews, and people are looking for new places to move to, and so many of them join his rebuilt cities, and the economy grows, and the cities grow more powerful. One of the people who comes to this newly rebuilt city is one of the most interesting figures in early modern Jewish history. And that's someone named the Ramchal, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. If you see his dates, he did not live a very long time. He dies in the plague. He is a fascinating character. He's a true Renaissance man. Lives at the end of the Renaissance, but he's a true Renaissance man. He is born in Italy. The Luzzatto family is a very famous Italian family. He's in Padua. Then he's kind of hounded out of Padua. He goes to Amsterdam. He's hounded out of there. He goes to Akko, and then he dies in the plague. Why is he so hounded? Because he is someone who's interested in everything. He's a Kabbalist, but he also knows Italian culture, and he writes Italian poetry. He's a poet. He is somebody who is very connected to the ideas of Musar, right? Of becoming a better person, a better human being. He's an ethicist, right? And he is bothered. Everyone's bothered by him while he's alive. After he dies, everybody wants a part of him. Everybody wants to connect to him. The Hasidim, the Mitnagdim, the Enlightenment Jews, everybody thinks he's great, but while he's alive, he doesn't have such an easy time. His most famous work is a book called The Path of the Just, Mesilat Yesharim, which is it's a book of ethics. It's how to be a better person. But what's I think fascinating about it is it's very down to earth. He's speaking to people. He understands people. He understands human psychology. He understands what's hard for people and how they can make themselves better. And I'll just read you a little of the introduction because it's great. Right? This is what I brought you here. A consideration of the general state of affairs will reveal that the majority of men of quick intelligence and keen mentality devote most of their thought and speculation to the subtleties of wisdom and the profundities of analysis, each according to the inclination of his intelligence and his natural bent. There are few, however, who devote thought and study to perfection of divine service, love, fear, communion, and all the other aspects of saintliness. Right? It's not that they consider this knowledge unessential. Their failure to devote more attention to it stems rather from its being so manifest and so obvious to them that they see no needs for spending much time on it. Right? So the smart people do not study ethics. Consequently, this study and reading of works of this kind have been left to those of a not too sensitive, almost dull intelligence. Who studies how to be an ethical person? The dumb people. These you will see immersed in the study of saintliness, not stirring from it, right? So the smart people don't think they need ethics. The dumb people study it, but don't really understand it. This state of affairs results in evil consequences, both for those who possess wisdom and those who do not, causing both sides to lack true saintliness and rendering it extremely rare. The wise lack it because of their limited consideration of it, and the unwise because of their limited grasp. The result is that saintliness is construed by most to consist in the recitation of many psalms, long confessions, difficult fasts, ablutions in ice and snow, all of which are incompatible with intellect and which reason cannot accept. And then he goes through step by step how to become a holier person. And it's a very beautiful and powerful book. Now, he lives out his last years, 3 years. He arrives in Akko in 1743. He dies in 1746. And there's a synagogue in the old city of Akko, which is attributed to him. It's the only synagogue in the old city today. The question is, was this the original site, or maybe it was somewhere else and then it was moved, but it's definitely a very ancient synagogue. It has no bima. It doesn't have a reader's desk that's high up. Rather, it has a hole in the floor because you're supposed to cry out to God from the depths. Okay? If you go to the synagogue today, you can see a Sefer Torah, a Torah scroll that is from his time. It's very unusual, A, because it's very old, but B, because it's, as you can see, the color is kind of strange. It's written on deer skin. A Torah scroll can be written on the skin of any kosher animal. Today we usually use calves or cows, but you can write a Torah scroll on deer skin, and this is on deer skin written with pomegranate ink. So it's a very unusual thing. You can see it in the Ramchal synagogue. Okay, moving right along to Ottoman times. Okay, after Dar al-Omar, the major ruler of the city of Akko is someone named Ahmad Pasha, but his nickname is Al-Jazar, the butcher. Not exactly a lovely nickname, gives you a little bit of an idea of this guy, right? He gets things done, but he's not exactly someone you want to get too close to because you could lose various limbs. He's very ruthless, but he makes Akko flourish. His main advisor, by the way, is a Jew, right? Remember, the Jews are the early adopters of the city, and his main advisor is a Jew named Chaim Farchi, who doesn't really get rewarded for his pains of being a very loyal advisor. He's not spared by Al-Jazar. He loses an ear, he loses a nose, but he remains loyal to Al-Jazar. And in the old city, you may remember we saw it on the map, you have a mosque called the Al-Jazar Mosque, which is the largest in Israel outside of Jerusalem. You can see the very elaborate, very beautiful interior. Beautiful sundial outside, right? Sundial, very important for Islam because you have to pray at very specific times of the day that are connected to sunrise and sundown. So this is Al-Jazar's mosque. Al-Jazar's greatest challenge is Napoleon. Okay, Napoleon comes up from Egypt on his way to conquer the world, and he makes his way up the coast of the land of Israel. He gets to Jaffa. Okay? He destroys Jaffa. He murders many, many, many people, and he continues, and he wants to go on to Akko, and from there on to Turkey. Only in Akko, he is stopped by a very significant coalition of the British and the Ottoman Turks. Okay? Now, Napoleon understands that Al-Jazar has a Jewish advisor, and he appeals it to him. He appeals to Chaim Farchi. He says, I'm good for the Jews. I've looked at the Jews in France. I've done so much for them, but Chaim Farchi is loyal to Al-Jazar, and he won't betray him. And this coalition of Al-Jazar and the British Navy, led by Admiral Sidney Smith, defeat Napoleon, and he retreats, and that's basically that turns the tide of history. He does not continue in his world conquest. So Akko is very, very important. And again, we're at one of those moments that are major clash of world powers. Is this the Messianic age, right? We had Crusaders and Muslims. Now we have Napoleon and the Ottomans. Obviously, it's not the Messianic age, but the Jews who are looking at it from the outside are saying, wow, what's going on here? Now we have a fascinating account from a young man who's visiting the land of Israel at this time. He's only 26 years old. He's visiting the land of Israel, and he somehow gets caught up in all these battles, and he's terrified, and he gets on the first ship to get out of there, finding out that it's actually a warship. It's full of cannons. But he's not taking chances. He's staying on there, and he's getting out of there. Who is this young man? His name is Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. And Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, who is very much a Zionist, well, a proto-Zionist. There's no Zionism yet, right? But he says, everywhere I go to the land of Israel. And he actually does go to the land of Israel in his 20s, but he doesn't stay because of this Napoleonic War. And he writes about how they can't wait to get out of there, and they get on. They're terrified. And there's a cook who has pity on them and brings them coffee. And eventually they sail out. They get out of the land of Israel. They get out of the war zone. Okay? But that's Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, who's also one of those Jewish visitors to Akko. The Ottomans, besides building the mosque, build a few other things that are very important. One of them is a very beautiful bathhouse. We're going to come back to that in a minute when we talk about the Akko prison breakout. Today, it's been remade into a museum. And the Akko prison. Okay, the Akko prison, this very, very formidable, impregnable fortress built by Dar al-Omar, later used by the British. And again, like we said, it's built right above the Hospitaller Fortress. And it's a massive, terrifying thing. One of the very VIP prisoners that the Ottomans have is the Baha'u'llah, who's the founder. Excuse me, now he's a founder. He's one of the important followers of the Bab, who's the founder of the Baha'i religion. Okay? And he's a very important Baha'i prophet. The Ottoman Turks don't like him. They're worried he's going to foment all kinds of dissension, and they imprison him and his followers for 24 years. And not all of it is in the prison, but a lot of it is in the prison. Eventually, he dies, and he's buried near Akko, and these are the other Baha'i gardens. Some people might be familiar with the Baha'i gardens in Haifa. This is another site that's a very beautiful Baha'i site. The Baha'i are very, very into beauty. And this is where the Baha'u'llah is buried, and it's these beautiful gardens nearby. When the British conquer the land of Israel from the Ottoman Turks, they take over the prison. And it becomes a very infamous prison in the stories of early Zionism and the Jewish underground movements. It's used by the British. They have many prisons, right? They have a prison in Latrun, they have prisons in Jerusalem, they have prisons all over the country, but they choose to do executions of the Jews specifically in this prison because Akko does not have a Jewish population, and they know that there will be less pushback, there will be fewer demonstrations and rioting if they execute Jews in Akko than if they were to do it, for example, in Jerusalem. Today, the prison has been turned into a very impressive and beautiful museum about the story of the Jewish underground movements and their battle against the British. Probably the most famous prisoner in the Akko prison, and he's in lots of prisons, but most famously in Akko is Ze'ev Jabotinsky. Ze'ev Jabotinsky is the founder of revisionist Zionism, of Beitar. He is imprisoned in 1920 for organizing and taking part in the defense, the Jewish defense against the Arab riots. He actually gives himself up to the British, who are arresting all sorts of people. And he comes and he says, if you're arresting all those people, you should arrest me because I'm in charge. And he's sent from prison to prison. He gets sent from Jerusalem to Suez, to Haifa, to Akko. Finally, in Akko, he becomes a real celebrity. He gives lectures. People come to the prison to hear his lecture. Eventually, he's pardoned by the British High Commissioner, by Herbert Samuel, after only 3 months, because he's too much of a celebrity. There's immense public pressure to free him. But his followers, right, the people of the Irgun, many of them are imprisoned in the prison. Just on the side here is the Beitar song, is the Beitar anthem, speaking about Hadar, right, the dignity that a Jew has to have, and to die or conquer the hill, Yodfat, Masada, Beitar, right? He takes these famous examples from Jewish history of battling against the Romans, against the conqueror, and he brings them into the story of the Jewish underground movements. As we said, the British execute the executions that they do of the Jews are done in Akko. These are called the Oleh HaGardom, the martyrs, a total of 8. One in 1938, the rest of them in 1947. They are all, as you can see, right? They're all members of the Irgun. Executed for different reasons. 3 of them because they took part in the prison breakout, but we have other reasons for attacking British officers, right? And they are executed in the prison. And today there is a memorial by the gallows for these 8 prisoners who were executed here. You have their names, and you also have a stanza from the Hatikva, which they would sing during their trials and when they were being brought for execution. And we also have a very, very powerful letter written by one of these 8, by Dov Gruner, writing to his commander. He's an Irgun soldier who's his commander, Menachem Begin. And this is the letter that he writes as he's waiting to be executed. From the bottom of my heart, I Thank you for the encouragement you have given me during these faithful days. Be assured that whatever happens, I shall not forget the principles of pride, generosity, and firmness. I shall know how to uphold my honor, the honor of a Jewish soldier and fighter. I could have written in high-sounding phrases, but words are cheap, and skeptics can say, after all, he had no choice. And they might be right. Of course, I want to live. Who does not? But what pains me now that the end is so near is mainly the awareness that I have not succeeded in achieving enough. Okay? And he goes on, and I'll just read to you the end because we don't have time for everything. He talks about what should a Jew do, and should a Jew accept compromises and assimilate, but he feels that that's the way to the Holocaust. The only way that seems to my mind to be right is the way of the Irgun Tzvai Leumi, the way of courage and daring without renouncing a single inch of our homeland. When political negotiations prove futile, one must be prepared to fight for our homeland and our freedom. Without them, the very existence of our nation is jeopardized, so fight we must with all possible means. This is the only way left to our people in their hour of decision, to stand on our rights, to be ready to fight, even if for some of us this way leads to the gallows. For it is a law of history that only with blood shall a country be redeemed. I am writing this while awaiting the hangman. This is not a moment in which I can lie, and I swear that if I had to begin my life anew, I would have chosen the exact same path, regardless of the consequences for myself. Your faithful soldier, Dove. So Akko is very much connected to modern Jewish history. The most spectacular event that happened there is the prison breakout, which happened on May 4th, 1947, as you can see, made the front page of the New York Times. The idea was not only to get the Jews out, which they knew wasn't going to be particularly successful. Only 41 Jews escaped and 214 Arabs, and 9 Jews were killed. But the idea was to embarrass the British. This is a very, very high profile, super powerful prison, and the Jews, these prisoners, are able to make some homemade explosives and to escape. And how embarrassing is that for the British? They managed to break out through the wall that is right above the bathhouse, and they jumped on top of the bathhouse. The bathhouse roof broke, and the escapees fell into the bathhouse, which was open for women on that day. So you can imagine the to-do that went on. Okay, one last thing. In modern Akko, not in the old city, but in the new city, is an extraordinary building that was really created by the fortitude and the little bit craziness of this man, Marzion Badash, who passed away in 2015. He was a Jew from Tunisia, came to Akko in the 1940s, and his dream was to build a synagogue for the Tunisian Jews. Not only does he build a synagogue, but he, with his own money and with his own ideas, has it covered floor to ceiling, every single part of it, with incredible mosaics, right? Mosaics about the history of the land of Israel, mosaics about coins, about flora and fauna, about archaeology. It's an amazing, amazing place that he really created just on his own. The pictures do not do it any justice, but it's very worth seeing. He didn't make the mosaics, but they were his ideas. And his fundraising and getting people to do it. And it really is incredible. And today, if you go to Akko, it's a very interesting place. Some of it is gentrifying. There's interesting mix of Arabs, of Jews. These are pictures from the old city in the market. And I would definitely recommend going to see it and not just being satisfied with video. Okay, that is all. I see I don't have questions in the chat, but if people want to ask questions, I am very happy to hear, or comments or thoughts. I need one person to break the ice. Rabbi Fishman, go for it.
That was an exceptional presentation. You bombarded us with a million pieces of information. That is amazing. That could have been an entire course just in that one class. I was fascinated to know that Rabbi Nachman made his way to Akko. I did not know that piece of information. And really, really interesting in terms of how the Ramchal was a part of Akko's history as well. Is Akko what's the population makeup in terms of Jewish versus Arab and Muslim?
So it's about 2/3 Jews, 1/3 Arabs. Today, there's also, there were a lot of immigrants that moved in post 48. And how far is Akko from Tzfat? It's about an hour away. There were a lot of immigrants that moved in post 48, a lot of traditional Jews from North Africa, like the Tunisians, also from other places. Today, the last, I don't know, probably 10, 15 years, there's actually a Hesder yeshiva. There's a religious Zionist community in Akko. It's definitely an interesting mix of all sorts of people who are living there. So Rita asked, how far is Akko from Tzfat? You just go kind of straight east, 45 minutes to an hour. It's not terribly far, but Tzfat is definitely on the eastern side, and Akko is on the coast. Akko and Tzfat, by the way, have an interesting connection because those Oleg Ardom, those martyrs who were executed by the British, they weren't going to be buried in Akko. There was no Jewish cemetery in Akko. They are buried in the Tzfat Jewish cemetery. And if you go today to the very famous, very important Jewish cemetery in Tzfat, which includes the ancient cemetery, I think we're going to go to Tzfat, if I'm not mistaken, on one of our tours. So there is a memorial to the Oleg Ardom, and their graves are there. So there is a connection.
Okay, wonderful. That was actually a beautiful timed question, because next week we are visiting Tzfat. That was almost as if we planted you. And I would like to take this opportunity of thanking you, Shulie. That was so fascinating. I feel like I need a review and to really keep up. And are the Jews at risk in Akko? Another person is asking.
So I would say that when was it, 2021? I think we had those very difficult riots in mixed cities. There were definitely a few days that were very hard, and that Jews definitely were at risk. There's been some bridge building, and I think that it's much more stable today. But yes, it was definitely a very terrifying time for the Jews of Akko, those few days of the riots. So I would say that today Jews feel comfortable in Akko on the whole, but it was touch and go for a few months of how comfortable people felt going there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Please join us next week on Thursday, 12 noon Montreal time, as we will be continuing with Shulie, walking around the land of Israel. And next week, we will be exploring the city of Tzfat. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed. And thank you, Shulie. We're looking forward to another great presentation next week. All the best.
Thank you, everyone. Shabbat shalom. Oh, yes.
Can I ask something?
Of course.
Hi. Yeah, my daughter-in-law is Sharona Halleckman. She lives in Israel, and we're
I know
going
your
to
daughter-in-law. She's great.
Thank you. We think so too. So we're going to be in Israel, like from around June the 12th for a few weeks. And she told me that through Matan that you were